Your brother needs this more than you do, my mother said, lifting her wine glass without even looking at me. The life insurance payout was sitting idle anyway. Think of it as the family investing in itself. The fork in my hand felt suddenly very heavy. I set it down on the edge of my plate before I did something I couldn't take back. My brother sat across the table from me, scrolling his phone with one thumb, utterly unbothered. He was 31 years old and he had never once paid his own rent. Beside him, my father cut into his salmon with the focused calm of a man who had already decided the conversation was over before it began. The life insurance payout. My father's words landed like a stone dropping into still water. That money, $280,000, was from my grandmother's policy. She had named me as the sole beneficiary. She had told me herself, sitting in the sunroom of her little house in Asheville 2 winters before she died, her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea. That money is for your clinic, sweetheart, she'd said. You've been working toward it since you were 12 years old. She meant the physical therapy practice I'd been building toward for 9 years, the one I had sacrificed weekends and relationships and the better part of my 20s for. I was 32. I had a master's degree I paid for myself, a mountain of student loans, and a business plan I had revised 17 times. I had been 3 months away from signing a lease on a small space in Portland. And somewhere between her funeral and this dinner, my parents had quietly redirected every cent of it to fund my brother's idea, a craft distillery experience he'd sketched on a cocktail napkin 6 weeks ago. That money was left to me, I said. My voice was level, careful, by name, in her policy. My father finally looked up. The beneficiary designation went through the estate account which your mother and I co-manage. We have authority over how distributions are applied. That's not how life insurance works, I said. It is when there's a family trust involved. He said it with such practiced smoothness that I understood in that moment that this conversation had been rehearsed. He had already spoken to someone. A lawyer, maybe, or someone playing one. My brother glanced up from his phone just long enough to offer me a half smile. It's not like it's gone, sis. Once the distillery starts turning a profit. Don't, I said. He shrugged and went back to his screen. My mother reached across the table and touched my wrist with 2 fingers, the way she always did when she wanted me to feel managed. You have a good salary. You have stability. Your brother is trying to find his footing. That's what families do. They carry each other. I thought about all the years I had carried. The summer I worked double shifts at the hospital rehab unit to pay my own tuition. The holidays I'd skipped to study for licensing exams, the way I had never once asked them for a single dollar after the age of 19, because I had seen early what the cost of that would be. I want it back, I said quietly. All of it. Or I am calling an attorney first thing Monday morning. My mother's fingers went cold on my wrist. You would do that to your own family? You did it first, I said. I picked up my bag and walked to the door. My father's voice followed me into the foyer. Before you go making calls, you should know that I'm the one who referred you to the Hargrove Group. I play golf with their managing partner every Thursday. 1 text from me and that lease negotiation ends before it starts. I stopped. I didn't turn around. Come back to the table, he said. Finish your dinner and let this go. I walked out into the November cold and sat in my car for a long time before I trusted myself to drive. I had made a mistake. I understood that by Sunday night. I had called my brother on Saturday morning, still raw, and told him I knew what they'd done and that I was going to fight it. He had been sympathetic in that particular way of his, soft voice, lots of "I hear you," and I had believed for about 4 minutes that he might actually be an ally. By Monday, I knew he had gone straight to our parents. When I arrived at the rehabilitation center where I worked, the department head called me into her office before I'd even put down my bag. Her expression was the careful neutral of someone who does not enjoy what they are about to say. We received a call over the weekend, she said, from your father. The air in the room changed. He expressed concern about your mental state. He mentioned some erratic behavior at a family gathering, some threats. She slid a printed email across her desk. He also forwarded this. It was an email chain, my name in the center field, messages addressed to my mother and brother, vicious and fragmented, calling them thieves, threatening to go to the press, one message that seemed to suggest I had been drinking at work. I read them twice, my hands very still in my lap. "I didn't write these," I said. "I believe you're under a great deal of stress," she said in a tone that made clear she did not entirely believe me. "Given the sensitivity of our patient population and the liability concerns, we need to place you on administrative leave while we review." "Paid leave," she added as though that softened it. I drove home in a daze. By Wednesday, the distillery's new Instagram account had posted a long emotional story from my brother. He stood in front of a barn in soft golden light, talking about his dream and his family support, and delicately about how one person's bitterness had tried to tear it apart. He didn't name me. He didn't need to. Enough mutual acquaintances knew. My phone started filling with messages from people I'd known since college, asking carefully if I was okay, in the way people ask when they've already decided you're not. By Friday, my checking account flagged an irregular hold. My father had reported suspicious activity to the bank, claiming I had unauthorized access to a joint account that I had closed 4 years ago. It took 3 days and a branch manager to untangle. Then the envelope arrived. It was thick and cream-colored from a law firm in Seattle I didn't recognize. My parents were suing me for defamation and emotional distress. Inside the packet, near the back, was a document I had allegedly signed 18 months ago, a financial power of attorney, granting my father authority over my assets in the event of cognitive or emotional incapacitation. The signature looked exactly like mine. I turned to the date. It was the day of my grandmother's funeral. While I was standing at her graveside in the rain, they had been building the architecture of my erasure. I called a legal aid hotline that night because I couldn't afford the retainer for a real attorney yet. The volunteer on the line listened, asked a few questions, and then said something that I have thought about many times since. If the signature is forged, that's not a civil matter. That's criminal fraud. I hung up and sat on my kitchen floor for a while. Then I opened my laptop. I am a physical therapist. I am not an investigator. I am not a forensic accountant. But I have spent 9 years learning how systems work, how bodies compensate, how one hidden weakness creates cascading failures everywhere else. I applied that same logic to my brother's distillery. The LLC paperwork was public record. It had been filed 6 weeks before my grandmother died. My name wasn't on it, not yet. But the registered agent address was our parents' house, and the initial capital contribution listed was $280,000. I started pulling threads. The distillery didn't have a physical location. The website listed a tasting room, coming soon, in a town outside of Portland, but the address resolved to an empty commercial property that hadn't been leased. There were no permits filed with the Oregon Liquor Control Commission. There was, however, a robust social media presence and a membership program, Founding Barrel members charging $500 a year for early access to products that didn't exist yet. I found 37 people who had paid. But that wasn't the worst part. My father owned a mid-size construction firm. I had known for years that it was struggling. I'd overheard enough phone calls growing up to understand that his margins were thin and his relationships with subcontractors were fractious. What I hadn't known was how bad it had gotten. Through public court records, I found 3 pending liens against Turner Wade Construction, 2 from suppliers and 1 from a former employee alleging unpaid wages. And then I found the holding company. It was called Cascade Valley Investments, LLC. My father was the managing member. My brother was listed as a secondary member. And the third name on the filing, added 8 weeks ago, right around the time my grandmother's insurance payout cleared, was mine. I was listed as the chief financial officer of a company I had never heard of. Cascade Valley had received a $280,000 capital injection. Cascade Valley had then made a series of consulting payments to the distillery, which cycled money back through another entity into an account that, based on the routing numbers I eventually traced through public business filings, appeared to belong to Turner Wade Construction. They weren't just using my inheritance to fund a vanity project. They were routing money from my father's failing business through my name to clean it up. The distillery was the vehicle. I was the hood ornament. If anyone ever looked at Cascade Valley, they wouldn't find my father. they'd find me, a licensed healthcare professional with a clean record and a convenient new diagnosis of emotional instability. I understood then why the forged power of attorney mattered so much. It wasn't just about controlling my assets. It was about being able to say, if it ever came to that I had authorized all of it. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. Then I did the thing I had promised myself I wouldn't do. I called my father. "I know what Cascade Valley is," I said when he answered. "I know about the construction liens. I know you ran the money through the distillery and put my name on the holding company. Give me back my inheritance. Remove my name from all of it, and I disappear. You never hear from me again." There was a pause. When he spoke, his voice was almost kind. "I wondered how long it would take you to find that. So you'll fix it?" "Check the Secretary of State's website," he said. "The new filing went up this morning." I refreshed the page on my laptop. A new document had been uploaded to Cascade Valley's record. It was a signed statement, my signature again, the same forgery, confirming that I, as CFO, had approved a series of irregular transfers for personal use, specifically to cover losses from speculative investments. There was a notary stamp, the same notary who had witnessed the power of attorney. "If you go to anyone," my father said, "you aren't the victim. You're the one who cooked the books. I have a paper trail that goes back 2 years. It's very convincing." A pause. "We're having a launch event for the distillery next month. The Portland food and wine community will be there. A lot of people your brother has cultivated. It would be a shame for you to disrupt that." He hung up. I sat in the dark of my apartment and thought about my grandmother, about how she had saved that money for 30 years, about how she had made me promise, the last time I saw her lucid, that I would build something of my own. I had tried to fight with my voice and they had taken it. I had tried to fight with evidence and they had turned it against me. There was nothing left to do but go further back. My grandmother had moved into memory care 8 months before she died. Her house had been cleared by the estate executor shortly after. Among the items the executor couldn't account for, mentioned in a brief note I found clipped inside the estate paperwork my aunt had saved, was a small digital camera, vintage, likely from the early 2000s. The note said it had been set aside with other personal effects and would be mailed to me as the named heir. I had never received it. I called the executor's office the next morning. After 15 minutes on hold, a clerk confirmed that a box of personal effects had been mailed to my parents' address, not mine, because my parents had listed themselves as the primary contact during the estate process. I drove to my parents' house that afternoon. They weren't home. I had a key. I had always had a key, and I knew where my grandmother's things had been stored because I had seen the boxes in the mudroom on my last visit. I found the camera in the third box, wrapped in a dish towel. The battery was dead. I drove to a drugstore, bought a compatible charger, and sat in the parking lot for 45 minutes. The memory card had 340 files on it. Most were photographs, Christmas dinners, birthday parties, my grandmother's garden in various seasons, and then, near the end, 3 video files. The first 2 were unremarkable. The third was dated 11 days before she died. My grandmother had been in the hospital at that point. Her house was empty. The video was shot from an angle I recognized, the high shelf in her study where she kept her reference books. She mentioned once that she had a camera up there to watch for the neighbor's dog, which she claimed got into her garden. On the screen of my phone, in grainy but clear footage, I watched my mother sit down at my grandmother's desk. My father stood over her shoulder. My mother had a piece of paper in front of her. She wrote a signature, looked at it, wrote it again. The loop on the second letter, my father said. She hooks it to the right. My mother tried again. There, he said. That's the one. Then my father said something I will never forget for as long as I live. Once we have the POA and the CFO signature predated, we're insulated, the business debts are bridged. And if it ever goes sideways, the paper trail leads to her, not us. My mother put the pen down and looked at the ceiling. Do you think she'll figure it out? My father picked up the papers and tapped them against the desk to straighten them. Maybe eventually, but by then it'll be too late to matter. I watched the video 3 more times. Then I drove home, made a large pot of coffee, and did not sleep. The launch event was held on a Saturday evening at a venue in the Pearl District, an airy, exposed brick space that my brother had somehow convinced a well-known local food writer to co-host. There were maybe 120 people there, investors, food bloggers, a few local journalists, my brother in a flannel shirt that probably cost $300, my parents near the back, comfortable, presiding. I had spent the preceding week very carefully. I had found, through a contact I'd made during a hospital compliance audit 3 years ago, an investigator with the Oregon Department of Justice's Financial Crimes Unit. I had not called the IRS. I had gone to the state level first because I understood the landscape better and because I had learned not to show my hand too early. I had given the investigator everything: the Cascade Valley filings, the distillery's membership fraud, the construction liens, the forged signatures, and the video. I had also spent $400 I could not easily spare to hire a freelance AV technician for the evening. I walked into the launch party at 7:45 in my interview blazer. I had not told anyone I was coming. My brother saw me from across the room and the color left his face. He started moving toward me, and I saw him glance at my parents, and I saw my father begin to cross the floor with the deliberate calm of a man who believes he has already won. "You need to leave," my father said quietly when he reached me. "Right now, before I make a scene." "I think the scene's already here, Dad," I said. "I just walked in." He took my arm above the elbow. "I'm asking you nicely." "I know," I said. "And I'm asking you to let go of my arm." He didn't, so I spoke loudly enough for the nearest cluster of guests to hear. "I'd like to show everyone something about the company they're considering investing in." My father released my arm. I nodded to the AV technician, who was watching from the equipment table near the back wall. The screen behind the Cascade Valley Spirits display, which had been cycling through artisan photos of empty barrels and dewy botanicals, went dark. Then the video began. The audio was unmistakable. My mother's voice, my father coaching her through a forgery. The date and timestamp metadata displayed in the corner of the screen, sourced from the original camera file. 11 days before my grandmother died, in her house, at her desk. The room went very quiet. My mother said something sharp that I couldn't hear over the blood in my ears. My father turned to face the screen, and for a moment he looked like a man who had simply stepped off a curb he didn't see. "That's fabricated," he said to the room, turning, opening his hands. "This is what I told you about. She's been unstable." "The camera belonged to my grandmother," I said into the silence. "The metadata is forensic grade. It's already been reviewed by the Oregon Department of Justice." The front doors opened. It was not the police. It was 2 investigators from the Financial Crimes Unit, accompanied by a uniformed officer. They had impeccable timing, which was not accidental. I had told them 8 p.m. My father was escorted from the venue with his hands behind his back. My mother followed, her silk blouse catching the light as she turned back to look at me once at the door. I didn't look away. My brother stood in the middle of the room holding a glass of his own whiskey, which didn't technically exist yet, and stared at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. It took me a moment to identify it. It was the look of a person who has just realized that the floor they have been standing on belongs to someone else. "I didn't know about the forgery," he said. He may have believed that. I took the glass out of his hand and set it on a nearby table. "Then you have a lot to figure out," I said. "I'd start with a lawyer." The process that followed was neither fast nor clean. These things never are, regardless of what any story makes you believe. There were months of hearings. There was a civil case running alongside the criminal one. There was a forensic document examiner who testified about the signature forgeries with the calm authority of someone who has spent 30 years being absolutely certain. The video, authenticated by a digital forensics firm, was entered into evidence and was, my attorney told me afterward, effectively the end of any defense they might have constructed. My parents pled guilty to charges including forgery, wire fraud, and financial elder abuse, the last count added because the forgery had been committed using documents tied to my grandmother's estate while she was incapacitated. Each received a sentence that included federal prison time and restitution. The power of attorney was vacated. The CFO designation was expunged from Cascade Valley's records. The $280,000 was returned to me with interest from the liquidation of my father's business assets. Turner Wade Construction was dissolved. The wrongful termination case against my former employer settled quietly. I won't discuss the amount, but it covered 2 years of lost salary, which was more than I needed and less than what was fair, which is how most settlements go. My brother cooperated with investigators. His testimony helped establish the timeline of the forgeries. In exchange, he was not charged. He moved to his girlfriend's family's property in eastern Oregon. Last I heard, he was working at a feed store. I don't know if that's true. I don't ask. I signed the lease on my clinic in January. It's smaller than I originally planned, but it's in a good location, a mixed-use building near a hospital campus, which means referrals come naturally. I spent 2 weeks painting the waiting room myself, a particular shade of green that my grandmother had on her kitchen walls. The sign on the door reads, Callaway Physical Therapy, which is my grandmother's maiden name. I didn't decide that until the day I was filling out the DBA paperwork, and then it seemed like the only possible choice. Some mornings I sit at my desk before the first patient arrives and I think about that dinner table, the wine glasses and the marble countertops and my mother's fingers on my wrist. The way my father had spoken about peace of mind as though it were a thing you could buy at someone else's expense. They got their peace briefly. They got 3 months of a beautiful lie. I got 9 more months of the hardest year of my life. And then I got everything they tried to take from me, plus the knowledge of exactly how strong I had always been and never quite believed. My grandmother knew. She told me in that sunroom over chamomile tea. She said, the ones who plan against you are always more afraid than you are. Remember that. I didn't understand it then. I do now. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened, not just the fraud, not just the forged signatures, but the whole long architecture of it. And what I keep coming back to isn't anger. It's something quieter than that. It's the recognition that everything they built against me, they built using the same tools they'd spent years training me not to use: deception, self-interest, the willingness to treat another person as a means to an end. They thought those tools made them strong. What they actually made them was visible. My father was a smart man. I want to be honest about that. He understood systems. He understood how paper trails work and how people read them. What he didn't understand, what I don't think he was ever capable of understanding, is that intelligence without integrity doesn't build anything that lasts. It constructs. And the problem with construction is that it requires maintenance. Every lie my parents told required another lie to hold it up. Every forged document needed another layer of story around it. By the time I found the camera, they had built something so elaborate that one small piece of footage could bring the whole thing down in a single evening. That's not luck. That's the nature of what they chose to do. I think about my grandmother often. She was not a dramatic person. She was practical and clear-eyed, and she did not waste words. She saved for 30 years because she believed in patience, not as passivity, but as a form of discipline. She believed that what you build slowly and honestly outlasts what someone else grabs quickly. She was right, even if she didn't live to see it. There were moments in that year when I genuinely did not know if I was going to come out of it intact. When my accounts were frozen and my job was gone and the lawsuit was sitting on my kitchen table, I remember thinking that integrity was an expensive thing to hold onto, that maybe the people who compromise early are just more rational. I don't believe that anymore. What I understand now is that integrity isn't just a moral position. It's a strategic one. When everything else is stripped away, the job, the money, the social standing, the one thing that remained completely mine was the truth. And the truth, it turned out, was enough. I also learned something about patience that I hadn't fully understood before. I had always thought of myself as patient because I worked hard and waited for things. But real patience, the kind that matters, isn't just waiting. It's continuing to think clearly when every instinct is telling you to react. It's resisting the urge to show your cards before you have the full hand. My biggest early mistake was calling my father when I'd found the shell company. I gave him the map and he used it against me within hours. The version of me that walked into that launch event 8 weeks later had learned something that I think will serve me for the rest of my life. You don't confront power with noise. You confront it with evidence, timing, and the willingness to be absolutely certain before you move. My clinic is real now. The waiting room has my grandmother's color on the walls. Every morning when I unlock that door, I think about what it cost and what it's worth and how those two things are not always the same number. What was taken from me was money. What I built back was something that can't be redirected into someone else's account, that belongs to me in a way that a wire transfer never could. The ones who plan against you, my grandmother said, are always more afraid than you are. I finally know what she meant. Fear makes people grab, and grabbing in the end is just another word for not trusting yourself to earn it.